radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear.
Good morning, UCY.TV listeners, as well as radio listeners. My name is Jerome, and I am the Sane Environmentalist. Welcome to the Age of Fission radio program for November 15th, 2017. This is a radio show where we talk about the nuclear taboo as well as other taboo, the things that people don't want to hear about. Our job is to raise awareness and educate people so that they can become activated and take steps to help protect us and our people. I want to announce that tomorrow I have a very exciting guest. Donna Gilmore is going to be on. We're going to do an interview with her. We're going to talk about San Onofre, about what's going on there, and some of the issues involved around the quote-unquote storage of spent nuclear fuel that is going on there. And I wanted to talk about, first of all, the nuclear taboo. Okay, and Lonnie and I have been doing a show every night on YouTube, a live thing, that talks about the nuclear taboo and what is the nuclear taboo. You know, I think the nuclear taboo is basically that most of the people in the world are unaware of radiation, radioactivity, the effects of radioactivity, and it's a very scary thing. Radiation is invisible. You can't taste, hear, smell, or see it. Anybody who's gotten an X-ray would know that I didn't feel anything, nothing. Well, and you won't. Radiation is all around us. It is a natural part of our planet to a certain extent. However, because of our humanity, you know, we are spreading it out and around and concentrating it everywhere we go. And a good example of the nuclear taboo would be, you can look at Fukushima in Japan, where the older people are basically, a lot of them are like, well, I'm moving back in because I don't see any radiation, or everything's green and beautiful. There's no difference. You can't tell me that this is poison because look at it, it's beautiful. I have a record-setting crop of eggplants and rice this year. The rain is good. Everything is good. And some of the younger people, however, that are more educated and that have children are going, yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't want to go back there. And the Abe government is forcing them to go back, saying, it's safe now. Everything's good. We cleaned it up. The taboo comes in where the older, wiser people, or the majority in the United States, don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. As far as they know, everything's fine. And the younger people, a lot of them, or some of them anyway, know that it's not fine. And they know that the effects of this are long-term and down the road and cumulative. And for instance, I read or saw a interview with a lady who's the director of what's called the Fukushima Collaborative Clinic. And it was translated by a translator as she gave the speech, because she speaks Japanese. But she talked about how the parents and grandparents would bring fresh vegetables to their kids' house, because that's what they've always done. They help support their children. And they're like, here's fresh vegetables. And the children, knowing where those vegetables came from, are like, in their minds going, oh, no, I am not going to feed my children these vegetables, or myself these vegetables. Not going to do it. But they can't say anything for fear of dishonoring the gift provided by their parents and their grandparents, and so they quietly take the vegetables and in a very humble way thank their provider, and then they in turn throw the vegetables away. I mean, you can't even compost them, because then you're going to have radioactive compost. So they throw them away. And if the parents and grandparents ever found out about that, it would raise all kinds of problems, because they're, as far as the parents and grandparents are concerned, everything's fine. The government told us everything's fine. So why are you overreacting? And that same thing in the United States. The government tells us everything's fine. Why are you overreacting? We're cleaning up Hanford. The whip is going to be just as safe as can be. There's no chance for any kind of radioactivity leak. Oops! Well, except for that one. But that was only one, and it was small, as far as you know. And anybody who saw my interview with, oh God, what was that guy's name? Don Hancock. And he'll tell you, yeah, there was radiation at the service. There was an internal contamination of some of the workers. They sent the workers underground when it was radioactive, knowing it was radioactive. But, money talks, and it's all about the money. So that is the nuclear taboo. The nuclear taboo is the people who are unaware don't want to be educated for the most part. They don't want to know. They don't want to hear it. It is kind of similar to the flat earth people, who are like, the earth is flat, and everybody's like, no, it's not. We know it's not. And I don't think the earth is flat personally, but they're like, no, the earth's fine. It's not flat. You're crazy. And actually, that isn't a good example, but that's the way that the people, according to the taboo, look at the people who are pointing out the facts that, yes, there is radiation. Yes, it is dangerous. I was looking at a survey they did just today of the children of Fukushima, and there's a handy chart, that discusses number of patients that they had that had malignant tumors in their thyroid glands versus the radiation level zone that they were in. And even at 2 to 5 microsieverts per hour, there were over 100 cases of malignant thyroid cancer. At 2 to 0.66 microsieverts per hour, there were 411 cases. And then when you get down to 0.66 and below, then the number drops. Interestingly enough, in zone 1 at over 5.2 microsieverts per hour, they only had 2 cases. I would bet that that is because most of those people got evacuated fairly quickly. But 5 microsieverts per hour is about the equivalent of getting a dental x-ray once an hour. So, a friend of mine was telling me, well, that's like nothing. That's 5 millionths of a sievert. That's 0.00005 sieverts per hour. Or sieverts. He didn't say per hour, because he doesn't understand that it is cumulative. And he doesn't want to understand that it is cumulative. What he wants to understand is that it's 5 millionths of a sievert. And one sievert is enough to kill you. So, it's like taking 5 millionths of the amount of a poisonous drug. It's not going to kill you. You won't even notice it. But if that drug stuck around and you kept doing 5 millionths of a dose every hour on the hour, hour after hour, eventually you would get to the point to where you were poisoned by that poisonous drug. And that's the way radiation is. It's basically a cumulative poisonous drug. And it slowly but surely builds up in your system, and the damage is, it grows on itself, It's cumulative. It's not the sort of thing that just goes away. It's not like, oh, I got a dose, now I'm better. It's not the way it works. So we as citizens really do need to break the nuclear taboo. We need to educate people that, there's people that get cancer at 0.6 microsieverts per hour. Less than a billionth of a sievert per hour is enough to give you cancer. And there's evidence of that. People don't want to see that evidence, and it's my job as the Sane Environmentalist to put that evidence out there in a sane, rational way that people can understand. And I think that as humans on this planet, we are unique. We are a unique species because we have to have outside energy in order to survive. If you took away all of our energy, if you took away the electricity and all the natural fuels and wood for burning even, we would quickly die. We would freeze to death. We couldn't cook our food. We couldn't clean our water. We would die. A few humans would live that could adapt, but not many. Not many. We can't even make tools to use to catch animals or to grow food without energy. So energy is intrinsic to human survival. And nuclear energy is, unfortunately, the way that many governments have decided to go. And in response to the whole, I guess you could call it a green revolution started by Al Gore with his unfortunate, what was it called? The Unfortunate Truth or an Unfortunate Something. I saw that movie in its premiere, and I was scared by it. With the whole going up in a lift and going, this is where we're going. It's going to be hotter than Venus on Earth in the next 50 years. And that was 15, 20 years ago, and the temperatures have barely risen since then, despite all of our outputs of carbon dioxide. It'll take a lot more carbon dioxide to really... Everybody's worried about global warming like it's the big disaster, but they're ignoring the nuclear disaster, which is ongoing and occurring and cumulative and will work against us way worse than a few degrees rise in temperature and a few feet rise in sea level. Humans are smart enough to adapt to higher temperatures and more water. We are not able to adapt to cell and DNA degradation caused by gamma rays, and alpha particles, beta particles, and neutrons, free neutrons flying around. We just can't adapt to that because that is not native even to us. Everything else we can get around. And the whole green revolution, I gotta say, is somewhat misguided. I think that has allowed the nuclear industry to flourish. And the nuclear industry started out as a war thing. Go to Hanford site, or go to Santa Susana site, and you'll see that they were developing nuclear power, not as a power, but as a way to create plutonium and U-235 so they could build bombs to keep us safe. And so the effort of building bombs to keep us safe has created hundreds of thousands of tons of super highly destructive substances, which will be around for thousands of generations. That's the way Don Hancock put it. Thousands of generations. In the big picture, it's really created much less safety for the human race. Mutually assured destruction has turned into assured destruction at this point, because there's no end game. There's no way out. There's no way to deal with this stuff. I did like, if anybody saw my interview with Don Hancock on the WHIP, you can see that salt mines don't work to hold the stuff, and that's supposed to be low-level waste. Some of it is neutron-bearing and gamma-bearing, but it is all, compared to fuel bundles, low-level waste. And I was looking up solar, how solar panels are built. And it turns out that there is a gigantic waste stream associated with building solar panels, and a very toxic waste stream at that. Silica. What they do is they take sand and they melt it, and they get the silica, and then they have to purify the silica, but only 0.05% they can only purify out 0.05%. The other 99.95% is waste, and it ends up in tailing piles. And silica is very damaging to the human body. So for every solar panel you see on somebody's roof, probably there's a gigantic pile of silica trailings and other chemicals that they had to use to manufacture these panels. They're not green. It takes an enormous amount of energy to melt and maintain and create this silica. It takes an enormous amount of energy to mine it. It takes enormous amounts of energy to manufacture these panels. So for every solar panel, you've got a 10,000 gallon tank of gasoline or diesel that has to be burned, 10,000 cubic feet of natural gas that had to be burned, and a gigantic pile of tailings. So how can you call that green? And they only last 5 to 10 years, and then the sun kills them, and you got to build new ones. And some people might be, well, you can recycle them. Well, the recycling process is extremely energy intensive. And the same with wind turbines. Wind turbines, it takes a huge amount of energy to create a wind turbine. And also wind turbines create infrasound, which is very damaging to humans and animals and birds. And they kill birds. I mean, pretty much the only green, quote-unquote, energy process that I could think of that would be somewhat non-destructive would probably be geothermal. If you could drill down to where it gets hot in the crust and run water through it to boil water to produce steam, that might be somewhat better. But the bottom line is, as humans, we need energy. And energy causes damage to the ecosystem, no matter how you do it. So don't be fooled by thinking there are green energy sources. Don't be fooled by thinking that nuclear energy is green. They want to call it green. They also wanted to call it too cheap to meter when they first did it. But guess what? Now it's more expensive per kilowatt hour than oil. So basically, and that even includes the transportation of the oil or the coal to the power plant. So nuclear energy is super expensive. It's damaging, and it creates products in the end that are around for thousands of generations. As people, we can consider ourselves, our grandparents, and maybe our great-grandparents. But anything behind that is just this kind of amorphous, yeah, I guess it had to happen because I'm here, but I don't know. Well, guess what? Imagine 1,000 generations back. Imagine where your family was 1,000 generations ago. And as we live longer, the generations are going to last longer. We used to be, people died at 40 to 50 years old, back in the 1700s. Now we live to 90 and 100, thanks in part to nuclear. I mean, nuclear has given us diagnostic tools and other things which have increased the lifespan of humans because we're able to see inside of our bodies, and that has been helpful in diagnosing things and helping us see the problems. And it's not like, well, his heart just gave out, I think, or he was old and he died, Now it's like, well, no, you can do this and you can do that, and there's just a million things you can do, and radionuclides are an important part of that. A friend of mine, when I told him that nuclear is evil, said, well, what about medical imaging? And what about smoke detectors? Imagine how many lives that saves every year. And I got to say, yeah, it does. That does save a lot of lives every year. But at what cost? How many lives will that cost in the end, in the long run? Over those 1,000 generations. Very many. And the mining, all the mining we do, the uranium mining, the coal mining, the oil drilling, all of that brings radionuclides to the surface where they get concentrated and sit in piles. I already talked a bit about solar and how big of a pile just one solar panel makes, how many gallons of oil and tanks of natural gas and the coal that it takes to fire the power plant to produce the electricity to make it, and uranium mines, terrible thing. The uranium mines are creating tailings piles, which are 5%, I think, 5% uranium, raw uranium, that they pull out of the depths of the earth and dump on the surface. And uranium produces, what do they call that? Gas, radon gas, and other things, which leach into the groundwater and into the air, and the dust flies. And there's been quite a few studies that talk about the impacts of the mining and other energy production on populations surrounding these mines. There's higher incidences of all kinds of diseases around there. And unfortunately, a lot of the mining that has been done, a lot of uranium mining has been done on native land, on the Cherokee and other reservations, and they just take over that spot and they dig out the uranium and they leave the tailing piles, and boom, Now you got giant piles of radioactive waste everywhere. And the average, I was reading a report, I think it was in Europe somewhere, where they had in India. They've got a uranium mine in India and processing facility nearby. And what is it? 10% of the babies born in that area have extreme birth defects. And as well, 10% of the women in that area, even after 3 years of marriage and trying, are unable to conceive children. And the average age for people in that area is 56. That's how long they're lasting before they die. There's no studies that have been done on what they die of because, well, it's India. You know, just like there's no studies being done on the native populations except by the native populations. Many Native Americans are literally having to become scientists and lawyers in order to fight this energy, quote-unquote, green energy production, which is destroying the land and the populations. You know, but there again, does anybody know about that? No. Why? Because that's part of the nuclear taboo. They don't want to hear it. People don't want to hear about that stuff, you know? They don't want to hear how native populations or poor people in India are being affected by this, because it's not them. It's not their family. It's not their parents or grandparents, which is all we really care about. You know, our grandparents are all dead. It's like our great-grandparents are all dead. So what? But the grandparents are still around. We love them. And our children and us, we're still around. And we're not affected for the most part. So what's the problem? There is no problem. You're being an extremist. You're trying to scare us with this nuclear boogeyman, which isn't a problem. You know, and besides, nuclear power is green. How many tons of CO2 does it keep from entering the atmosphere, which will cause global warming, and that will kill us all? Because the media has picked up on global warming, all right, and climate change. And so people know about that, and since the media is talking about that, it's not taboo. All right? So keep in mind, the media are a big part of this. You know, they are part of the nuclear taboo. They are part of the... I mean, when was the last time you saw any kind of a report about Fukushima on national news? You just don't see it anymore. For the first year or two, you saw how terrible it was, and then it was like, well, they cleaned it up. You know, I didn't really become aware of Fukushima until 2 years ago. You know, I thought I had as well was part of the nuclear taboo. I didn't exactly agree with nuclear energy, but I didn't see the problem with it. You know, I didn't understand the uranium mining and the wastes and the spent fuel and the potential for accidents, as well as the fact that these nuclear plants constantly emit a stream of tritium, H3, and that's acceptable, you know. I thought, well, and everything's within safe limits. I didn't know that Barack Obama had raised the safe limits to an extremely high limit, which is actually unsafe. So our government and the media have created a nuclear taboo, and the people have gone along with it. And they're like, you're just like talking about this boogeyman that doesn't exist, and we're fine. I'm fine. My grandparents are fine, and my children are fine. 10,000 generations? Who knows? Who knows what will happen in 800 to 1,000 years? Who cares? I'll be dead as well as everybody I know. So what? And that is the essence of the nuclear taboo and the irresponsibility of everybody who participates in it. You know, I would love for those people who believe that nuclear is safe, to go and visit that village near that uranium mine and mill in India and have a look at some of these babies that are massively deformed. You know, and they're born deformed, and what are they going to do? Kill them? They don't kill them, they raise them. And so you've got a whole population of sterile, deformed people forming in this one village in India. You know, as well, go to the Cherokee Indian reservation right near the Grand Canyon and have a look at the number of people there with cancers and birth defects. And then tell me there's no problem. You know, but there again, people would still be in denial. They would be like, well, it's not my family. I live in Los Angeles. It's just fine in Los Angeles. But it isn't. See, and that's the thing. You know, I was reading also from a report done by the Fukushima Collaborative Clinic. And the Fukushima Collaborative Clinic is a group of physicians in the Fukushima Prefecture which are doing cancer screenings, ultrasound screenings on the local populations in that area and reporting on it. And they're speaking out against the Abe government and against TEPCO, who are in conjunction together to cover this all up because the Olympics. You know, we want to get the Olympics in Japan. That'll prove to the world that we're safe. If you can have the Olympics here, well, then there couldn't be a problem, right? You know, and we're going to be sending our Olympic athletes from all over the world into this zone where, according to this one fellow on YouTube, who is also a hero, his name is Ken Ivoru, Kienaivooru. Check out his YouTube channel. He doesn't speak. All his titles are in Japanese, and he basically walks around with a Geiger counter. Comments are disabled. You can tell he's not trying to make waves with the government, but he is trying to get the information out there. And I would say the lowest reading I've seen him give was like 0.6 microsieverts per hour. And we just a minute ago talked about 0.6 microsieverts per hour is enough to give children thyroid cancer. You know, everywhere that he goes in Japan is radioactive. Some areas I saw as high as 117 microsieverts per hour. He goes, parks his car, gets out. It's like 1.2 microsieverts per hour. And he goes and he crosses a fence into the woods and puts his Geiger counter near the ground, and it shoots up to 50 to 60 microsieverts per hour. That's extreme, and that's where kids are. Kids are down low. They sit in the dirt, and they play in the dirt, and they dig in the dirt. The dirt gets in their mouth. You know, and a lot of the contamination is alpha and beta emitting, which isn't that big a deal because it can't really get through the skin. But if it's taken internally, well, that's a whole different thing. You know, and kids are down there playing in the dirt and eating the dirt, and it gets in their mouth and it gets in their noses, and they get it internally. You know, and pretty much the Abe government and TEPCO are colluding. I'm going to call it colluding to destroy the future generations of Japan. You know, it's bad enough that Japan had to deal with the Hiroshima and Nagasaki experiments. You know, and that was the dawn of the new age, the atomic age. You know, and where we were the world's heroes, and only through mutually assured destruction can we ever really be safe. And in order to get mutually assured destruction, we need to create and test thousands of these devices. Just the United States has enough nuclear weapons to kill every man, woman, and child on the planet. Just the United States. Soviet Union also has that many. China also has that many. India also has that many. Pakistan also, I believe, has tons of nuclear weapons. And now North Korea. And North Korea is completely irresponsible with their nuclear. They just basically collapsed that mountain where they were doing their testing, and that has sent a gigantic plume of nuclear waste right over Japan again. The poor Japanese people, I just feel so bad for them. They are still in a nuclear war. Every day they're in a nuclear war. Because the radiation levels on a regular basis are high enough to give children cancer. The Tokyo government for over a year now has been providing bottled water to people who have children because the tap water in Tokyo is radioactive. The beaches all along the whole coast of Japan are impregnated with cesium-137. And what happened is that cesium washed ashore from the coast and dissipated out of the air and onto the sand. And as it rains, it goes down into the sand. And they say that approximately 40 centimeters below the top level, at the top level, you have a little bit of radioactivity, that 0.6 to 1 or 2 microsieverts per hour, which is still high, dangerously high. But then you get down 30 or 40 centimeters into the sand, and there's a briny substrate down there. And that briny substrate they didn't use sieverts, they used becquerels, but like 50 to 60,000, up to 100,000 becquerels per cubic meter. And a becquerel is a disintegration per second of cesium-137, right 30 centimeters below the sand. And that is working its way slowly into this briny solution, which will work its way into the ocean. So, the entire country of Japan has just been horribly, horribly polluted and contaminated. And I predict that within 50 or 60 years, there will be no more Japan. That Japan, anybody who's Japanese will be living somewhere else other than Japan. So take that for what it's worth, That's part of the nuclear taboo, too, as well, is that we are not acknowledging the genocide that we are putting out there. The genocide we are allowing to go on all over the planet, imagine, if you will, the safety requirements for a North Korean plutonium extraction and processing facility. The workers probably have some safety that they probably wear gowns and have glove boxes working with it because they died too quickly. But do you think that they have any kind of a thought for the 1,000 generations down the road? Do you think they have any kind of thought for when they reprocess the spent fuel, what they do with the leftovers? With the depleted quote-unquote uranium, which is still you can still enrich it. You can enrich uranium-238. If you put it in a reactor and bombard it with neutrons, it'll become plutonium. So uranium-238 is not a safe thing. It's poisonous. Uranium-235 is not a safe thing. It's poisonous. Plutonium, as we all know, is about the most deadly substance on the planet. There is nothing on this planet that could more surely remove life from this planet. what I'm surprised with is that the plants aren't dying in Japan. Now, if that happened, if the plants all died off and the forests died off and nobody could grow food, well, then they would start to wake up, and the grandparents and the great-grandparents would go, hold it, maybe there is something wrong here. But the plants seem fine. If you go to Google Earth and look around at some of the towns near the Fukushima power plant, they're overgrown. Weeds everywhere, stuff growing like weeds. It's greener than green. You don't see any birds. You don't see any little critters running around. I was talking to my friend Lonnie Clark about that and how it seems the plants seem to do just fine. And she pointed out that in the Chernobyl forests, areas around Chernobyl, nothing is decomposing because there's no biota in the soil to assist decomposition. And so basically the carbon cycle has been brought to a halt there because you have no biota, no little critters and microbes in the soil which are disintegrating the leaves and other things into usable products for the plants to reabsorb. You're basically, she said the leaves, they just turn in spongy and they don't ever decompose. I would have to do more research on that to know for sure, but Lonnie's a pretty good lady and she's not going to say something that's not true. So, yeah, I believe that we are on the way. We're on the way, folks. How long are we going to wait for this before it's all over with? How long are we going to let this continue on? How long are we going to let our government tell us that nuclear power is safe and green? And oh yeah, we have this new kind of power plant which will work perfectly and is safe and green. It's not safe. It's not green. There's a huge waste stream involved behind it. There's a huge energy cost with all of these quote-unquote green energy sources. Huge energy cost that goes into the production and processing and manufacture of these products. So there's no such thing as green energy. There is no such thing. Like I said, maybe with the exception of geothermal, but God only knows how pulling heat out of the ground in an unbalanced way will affect the subsurface of the earth and maybe cause issues that we don't even understand yet. So we are aliens, I believe it. Humans are aliens on this planet. We've got to be, We've got to be. That's why we've developed computers and stuff. We are, as hard as we can, trying to find a way to get off this rock, And I hope we make it. I think that if nothing else, we are a fluke of genetics. We are a fluke. Because, how could that happen? You look at the evolutionary gap with the human race and how we went from basically club-bearing gorillas to standing upright, hairless beings with large brains. We went from medium small brains to large brains, and it happened very quickly, and there's no explaining it. And that's part of another taboo is, well, how do you explain that? And if you could explain it, what would the explanation be? Would it be that we are an experiment? That some outside, and I could see us doing this, outside thing came in and decided to twist our DNA just a little bit to create a bigger frontal lobe and cause a quantum leap forward in evolution. Perhaps, look at what we're doing with other creatures' DNA. We look at what we're doing with cloning. Look at what we're doing with our food products. How now we are genetically engineering our food products. And now we're trying to actually literally control the climate of this planet. You know, and I didn't buy the whole geoengineering thing. I didn't buy it. You know, I said, well, I'd have to see it with my own eyes. You know, because when I lived in Colorado, they must not be trying to geoengineer much there, because I didn't see any persistent contrails. That's what I'm going to call them. People call them chemtrails. I'm going to call it a persistent contrail. And I remember as a kid laying on the ground watching planes fly over, and I was fascinated by the plume that came out behind them and then kind of just disappeared into nothing after a little bit, you know? And it was kind of neat because you could watch the plane and you saw that the plane was there, but, you know, once that trail was gone, then it was as if there was never a plane. Well, this last month, the temperatures here in Arizona, where I'm living, started to drop, and they got out of the 90s and 100s every day down to the 70s and 60s every day, up to 80 occasionally. And clouds, you know, I had not seen any clouds in the sky, like literally cloudless skies, day after day after day. And then as soon as the temperature started to drop, all of a sudden now we have clouds. And just in the last few weeks, I started looking up at the clouds, and I'd see these weird, long, straight clouds. And it's like, well, I've never seen a cloud like that before. And then I'd look up a half an hour later, and it had kind of expanded out into a wide, long, straight cloud. And then after a while, that kind of created just a general haze over a good portion of the sky. And I was like, well, could that be a persistent contrail? And so I watched for them. And sure enough, I saw them happening. I would see a plane go over, and it would have a normal contrail, and then I would see it later on, and they're flying so high you can't see the plane, but I would see the contrail going, and I would watch it, and it didn't dissipate like they did when I was a kid, and I was like, well, that's weird, and sure enough, over the next couple hours, it turns into this big cloud. So, yeah, they are literally trying to geoengineer our planet. You know, us humans are allowing this. We're allowing the nuclear. We're allowing the oil. You know, and people, you know, I used to be much more pro-oil than I am now, and pro-natural gas than I am now. And what changed my mind on that is the fact that there is a lot of radioactive waste, believe it or not, that goes along with oil drilling. When you drill for oil, you loosen up radionuclides that are trapped deep in the soil, deep in the ground. And especially with fracking, where they pump water in and then pump it back out again, you know, and separate it. And the stuff they separate out, turns out, is very radioactive. Some of it extremely radioactive. The scale that forms on the insides of the pipes and the drill casings that they use is dangerously radioactive. Like, it is considered nuclear waste. I never knew that until like a month ago. You know, and Lonnie pointed out that there are somehow fracking wells injecting nuclear waste into the ground to try to get a bigger bang or something. And I was like, no way. So I looked that up. And it turns out, no, they aren't injecting nuclear waste into the ground. They're pulling nuclear waste out of the ground, or it is now nuclear waste out of the ground. And it's highly concentrated. And there again, you know, we're looking at uranium has a half-life of thousands of generations. You know, uranium-235 and 238, both. Thousands of generations before they finally eventually turn into lead. And within the surface, deep within the surface of the Earth, occasionally you're going to get, a little bit of radioactivity, and there is a certain amount of background radiation that happens from the decomposition of rocks and erosion that occurs on mountainsides and stuff. That's going to happen. But we are adapted, and life on Earth is adapted to handle those levels. And we're talking 0.01, 0.02, 0.03 microsieverts per hour. But when you get up to 0.6, 0.7, 1, 2, 5, because we're concentrating this stuff, we are not adapted to handle that. And what's going to happen is we are basically poisoning ourselves with all of our energy, all of it. So is there a solution to this, I ask you? Is there any way possible that we as a species can continue to survive on this planet without literally killing it? Kind of like a virus. We are very much like a virus. Our lives, our activities within the Earth are making the Earth ill. And just like any other virus, or any other being that gets a virus, the Earth is getting a fever. And the fever will kill off, hopefully, enough of the virus to where the virus is in check and its waste products don't harm the being. That's exactly what a virus does. The virus itself doesn't make you sick. Its waste products make you sick. And the reason that we get a high fever when we have a viral infection is that's our body's way of making it hot enough to where the virus can't survive and dies. And when it dies off, not all of it, enough of it, then the waste products are reduced to a point where our body can handle it, and then our temperature comes back down again. Is the Earth like a being? And are we like a virus inhabiting the Earth? And now that we've gotten to a key population density, our waste products are making the Earth ill, and the Earth is going to get a fever and kill almost all of us off until we are at a level, population-wise, to where we can no longer, our waste products, which, as I discussed at the beginning of this show, are inevitable, are not enough to harm the Earth anymore. If there was only 10,000 humans on the planet, our mining and oil production and all that would not be an issue. It'd be a drop in a bucket. But when you've got billions of us on this planet, and thanks to our medical science, we are now living longer. We are a tougher to kill virus. And if you think about it, if the average temperature all over the planet went up to 110 to 120 degrees average, that would kill off a bunch of people in the third world and in rural areas of the planet. But in large parts of the planet, we would ramp up our energy production so that we could artificially cool our environment. And that's what this whole geoengineering thing is about. It's now the temperature's rising, and so they're trying to create clouds to artificially cool the planet. And the stuff, of course, that they pump into the air is all deadly. And from what I understand, and I'm not positive of this, is destroying ozone in a big way. I saw another YouTuber who had a UVB/C measuring device, and he went out and measured the UVB and the UVC, and they were both very high. And I think UVC isn't even supposed to be able to hit the planet's surface because of the ozone layer. But we are destroying the ozone layer. It's getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And UVB and UVC go right through clouds. So it's not like there's any except for being inside under a roof or, massive amounts of clothing or some kind of sunscreen, that we would be able to survive that. So, in a twisted, sick way, that gives me hope. It gives me hope that maybe before nature is done, we will kill enough of ourselves off to where we're not a danger anymore to this beautiful planet that we were, in my opinion, placed upon. You know, we maybe started out as a natural thing, but I honestly believe that there was some outside impetus that created a change in our DNA. You know, because DNA doesn't do leaps and bounds like that. DNA is slow and steady. You know, every generation, the ones that are unable to die, the ones that live can reproduce, and then their offspring, some of them will inherit that trait, and some of them will mate with others that have inherited that trait, and then that trait becomes more and more established within the species. And as it becomes more established, then we move on to the next challenge, DNA-wise, genetically. You know, but to make a quantum leap, going from a small brain, you know, our brains as being the size of an orange, to the size of 2 grapefruits side by side, overnight. You know, and they can't explain it. And they don't want to explain it because they don't want to break that taboo. You know, and it's exactly what it is. It's a taboo. So I encourage you, and wasn't that just a wonderful talk? And don't you feel so much better about being a human now? Don't you feel like we're a natural part of this world, and we have every right in the world to exist here? I wish I did, you know. I value my own life, but that is just my selfish humanness. You know, I value my own life and my own existence, and I'm using energy right now to make this radio show for you guys, you know. I'm using the internet and a computer and light bulbs and all kinds of energy. So I am no better. I am no different than everybody else, you know. We are all bound by our difference to do destruction. And, you know, as an individual viruses are like, I'm just what I am, and I am just living my life. And, I got to take a crap, and well, I guess that makes the being that I'm in sick, and it burns me up in the end. Well, that's something I'll just deal with when I get burned up. So, at any rate, my name is Jerome. Look at my YouTube channel at the Sane Environmentalist. And remember to tune in tomorrow. We're going to have Donna Gilmore. And I hope everybody has a fantastic day. Thank you so much for listening. And every Wednesday and Thursday, I'll be here. Goodbye now. Drats, I never get that right. It's always like, it's hard for me. Yeah. See you guys tomorrow.